Chapter 18 of Democracy and Education. An Introduction to the Philosophy of Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Luke Sartor. Chapter 18 Democracy and Education by John Dewey. Chapter 18 Educational Values. The considerations involved in a discussion of educational values have already been brought out in the discussion of aims and interests. Specific values usually discussed in educational theories coincide with aims which are usually urged. They are such things as utility, culture, information, preparation for social efficiency, mental discipline or power, and so on. The aspects of these aims in virtue, of which they are valuable, has been treated in our analysis of the nature of interest, and there is no difference between speaking of art as an interest or concern, and referring to it as a value. It happens, however, the discussion of values has usually been centered about a consideration of the various ends subserved by specific subjects of the curriculum. It has been a part of the attempt to justify those subjects by pointing out the significant contributions to life accruing from their study. An explicit discussion of educational values thus affords an opportunity for reviewing the prior discussion of aims and interests on one hand, and of the curriculum on the other, by bringing them into connection with one another. 1. The nature of realization or appreciation. Much of our experience is indirect. It is dependent upon signs which intervene between the things and ourselves, signs which stand for or represent the former. It is one thing to have been engaged in war, to have shared its dangers and hardships. It is another thing to hear or read about it. All language, all symbols, are implements of an indirect experience. In technical language, the experience which is procured by their means is mediated. It stands in contrast with an immediate, direct experience, something in which we take part vitally and at first hand, instead of through the intervention of representative media. As we have seen, the scope of personal, vitally direct experience is very limited. If it were not for the intervention of agencies for representing absent and distant affairs, our experience would remain almost on the level of that of the brutes. Every step, from savagery to civilization, is dependent upon the invention of media which enlarge the range of purely immediate experience and give it deepened as well as wider meaning by connecting it with things which can only be signified or symbolized. It is doubtless this fact which is the cause of the disposition to identify an uncultivated person with an illiterate person. So dependent are we on letters for effective representation or indirect experience. At the same time, as we have also had repeated occasion to see, there is always a danger that the symbols will not be truly representative. Danger that instead of really calling up the absent and remote in a way to make it enter a present experience, the linguistic media of representation will become an end in themselves. Formal education is peculiarly exposed to this danger, with the result that when literacy supervenes, mere bookishness, what is popularly termed the academic, too often comes with it. In colloquial speech, the phrase, a realizing sense, is used to express the urgency, warmth, and intimacy of a direct experience, in contrast with the remote, pallid, and coldly detached quality of a representative experience. The terms mental realization and appreciation, or genuine appreciation, are more elaborate names for the realizing sense of a thing. It is not possible to define these ideas except by synonyms, like coming home to one, really taking it in, etc. For the only way to appreciate what is meant by a direct experience of a thing is by having it. But it is the difference between reading a technical description of a picture and seeing it, or between just seeing it and being moved by it, between learning mathematical equations about light and being carried away by some peculiarly glorious illumination of a misty landscape. We are thus met by the danger of the tendency of technique and other purely representative forms to encroach upon the sphere of direct appreciations. In other words, the tendency to assume that pupils have a foundation of direct realization of situations sufficient for the superstructure of representative experience erected by formulated school studies. This is not simply a matter of quantity or bulk. A sufficient direct experience is even more a matter of quality. It must be of a sort to connect readily and fruitfully with the symbolic material of instruction. Before teaching can safely enter upon conveying facts and ideas through the media of signs, schooling must provide genuine situations in which personal participation brings home the import of the material and the problems which it conveys. From the standpoint of the pupil, the resulting experiences are worthwhile on their own account. From the standpoint of the teacher, they are also means of supplying subject matter required for understanding instruction involving science, and of evoking attitudes of open-mindedness and concern as to the material symbolically conveyed. In the outline given of the theory of educative subject matter, the demand for this background of realization or appreciation is met by the provision made for play and active occupations embodying typical situations. Nothing need be added to what has already been said, except to point out that while the discussion dealt explicitly with the subject matter of primary education, where the demand for the available background of direct experience is most obvious, the principle applies to the primary or elementary phase of every subject. The first and basic function of laboratory work, for example, in a high school or college in a new field, is to familiarize the student at first hand with a certain range of facts and problems, to give him a feeling for them. Getting command of technique and of methods, of reaching and testing generalizations, is at first secondary to getting appreciation. As regards the primary school activities, it is to be borne in mind that the fundamental intent is not to amuse, nor to convey information with a minimum of vexation, nor yet to acquire skill, though these results may accrue as byproducts, but to enlarge and enrich the scope of experience, and to keep alert and effective the interest in intellectual progress. The rubric of appreciation supplies an appropriate head for bringing out three further principles: the nature of effective or real, as distinct from nominal standards of value, the place of imagination in appreciative realizations, and the place of the fine arts in the course of study. 1. The nature of standards of valuation. Every adult has acquired, in the course of his prior experience and education, certain measures of the worth of various sorts of experience. He has learned to look upon qualities like honesty, amiability, perseverance, loyalty, as moral goods, upon certain classics of literature, painting, music, as aesthetic values, and so on. Not only this, but he has learned certain rules for these values: the golden rule in morals, harmony, balance, etc., proportionate distribution in aesthetic goods, definition, clarity, system in intellectual accomplishments, These principles are so important as standards of judging the worth of new experiences that parents and instructors are always tending to teach them directly to the young. They overlook the danger that standards so taught would be merely symbolic, that is, largely conventional and verbal. In reality, working as distinct from professional standards depend upon what an individual has himself specifically appreciated to be deeply significant in concrete situations. An individual may have learned that certain characteristics are conventionally esteemed in music. He may be able to converse with some correctness about classical music. He may even honestly believe that these traits constitute his own musical standards. But if in his own past experience, what he has been most accustomed to and has most enjoyed is ragtime, his active or working measures of valuation are fixed on the ragtime level. The appeal actually made to him in his own personal realization fixes his attitude much more deeply than what he has been taught as the proper thing to say. His habitual disposition thus fixed forms his real norm of valuation in subsequent musical experiences. Probably few would deny this statement as to musical taste, but it applies equally well in judgments of moral and intellectual worth. A youth who has had repeated experience of the full meaning of the value of kindliness toward others, built into his disposition as a measure of the worth of generous treatment of others. Without this vital appreciation, the duty and virtue of unselfishness impressed upon him by others as a standard remains purely a matter of symbols which he cannot adequately translate into realities. His knowledge is second-handed. It is only a knowledge that others prize unselfishness as an excellence, and esteem him in the degree in which he exhibits it. Thus there grows up a split between a person's professed standards and his actual ones. A person may be aware of the results of this struggle between his inclinations and his theoretical opinions. He suffers from the conflict between doing what is really dear to him and what he has learned will win the approval of others. But of the split itself he is unaware. The result is a kind of unconscious hypocrisy and instability of disposition. In similar fashion, a pupil who has worked through some confused intellectual situation fought his way to clearing up obscurities in a definite outcome appreciates the value of clarity and definition. He has a standard which can be depended upon. He may be trained externally to go through certain motions of analysis and division of subject matter, and may acquire information about the values of these processes as standard logical functions. But unless it somehow comes home to him at some point as an appreciation of his own, the significance of the logical norms, so called, remains as much an external piece of information as, say, the names of rivers in China. He may be able to recite, but the recital is a mechanical rehearsal. It is then a serious mistake to regard appreciation as if it were confined to such things as literature and pictures and music. Its scope is as comprehensive as the work of education itself. The formation of habits is a purely mechanical thing, unless habits are also tastes, habitual modes of preference and esteem, an effective sense of excellence. There are adequate grounds for asserting that the premium so often put in schools upon external discipline, and upon marks and rewards, upon promotion and keeping back, are the obverse of the lack of attention given to life situations in which the meaning of facts, ideas, principles, and problems is vitally brought home. 2. Appreciative realizations are to be distinguished from symbolic or representative experiences. They are not to be distinguished from the work of the intellect or understanding. Only a personal response involving imagination can possibly procure realization, even of pure facts. The imagination is the medium of appreciation in every field. The engagement of the imagination is the only thing that makes any activity more than mechanical. Unfortunately, it is too customary to identify the imaginative with the imaginary, rather than with the warm and intimate taking in of the full scope of the situation. This leads to an exaggerated estimate of fairy tales, myths, fanciful symbols, verse, and something labelled fine art, as agencies for developing imagination and appreciation, and, by neglecting imaginative vision in other matters, leads to methods which reduce much instruction to an unimaginative acquiring of specialized skill and amassing of a load of information. Theory, and, to some extent, practice, have advanced far enough to recognize that play activity is an imaginative enterprise. But it is still usual to regard this activity as a specially marked off stage of childish growth, and to overlook the fact that the difference between play and what is regarded as serious employment should be not a difference between the presence and absence of imagination, but a difference in the materials with which imagination is occupied. The result is an unwholesome exaggeration of the fantastic and unreal phases of childish play, and a deadly reduction of serious occupation to a routine efficiency prized simply for its external, tangible results. Achievement comes to denote the sort of thing that a well-planned machine can do better than a human being can, and the main effect of education, the achieving of a life of rich significance, drops by the wayside. Meantime, mind-wandering and wayward fancy are nothing but the unsuppressible imagination cut loose from concern with what is done. An adequate recognition of the play of imagination as the medium of realization of every kind of thing which lies beyond the scope of direct physical response is the sole way of escape from mechanical methods in teaching. The emphasis put in this book, in accord with many tendencies in contemporary education, upon activity, will be misleading if it is not recognized that the imagination is as much a normal and integral part of human activity as is muscular movement. The educative value of manual activities and of laboratory exercises, as well as of play, depends upon the extent in which they aid in bringing about a sense of the meaning of what is going on. In effect, if not in name, they are dramatizations. Their utilitarian value in forming habits of skill to be used for tangible results is important, but not when isolated from the appreciative side. Were it not for the accompanying play of imagination, there would be no road from a direct activity to representative knowledge, for it is by imagination that symbols are translated over into a direct meaning and integrated with a narrower activity so as to expand and enrich it. When the representative creative imagination is made merely literary and mythological, symbols are rendered mere means of directing physical reactions of the organs of speech. 3. In the account previously given, nothing was explicitly said about the place of literature and the fine arts in the course of study. The omission at that point was intentional. At the outset, there is no sharp demarcation of useful or industrial arts and fine arts. The activities mentioned in chapter 15 contain within themselves the factors later discriminated into fine and useful arts, as engaging the emotions and the imagination. They have the qualities which give the fine arts their quality. As demanding method or skill, the adaptation of tools to materials with constantly increasing perfection. They involve the element of technique indispensable to artistic production. From the standpoint of product, or the work of art, they are naturally defective, though even in this respect, when they comprise genuine appreciation, they often have a rudimentary charm. As experiences, they have both an artistic and an aesthetic quality. When they emerge into activities which are tested by their product, and when the socially serviceable value of the product is emphasized, they pass into useful or industrial arts. When they develop in the direction of an enhanced appreciation of the immediate qualities which appeal to taste, they grow into fine arts. In one of its meanings, appreciation is opposed to depreciation. It denotes an enlarged and intensified prizing, not merely a prizing, much less, like depreciation, a lowered and degraded prizing. This enhancement of the qualities which make any ordinary experience appealing, appropriable, capable of full assimilation, and enjoyable, constitutes the prime function of literature, music, drawing, painting, etc. in education. They are not the exclusive agencies of appreciation in the most general sense of that word, but they are the chief agencies of an intensified, enhanced appreciation. As such, they are not only intrinsically and directly enjoyable, but they serve a purpose beyond themselves. They have the office, in increased degree, of all appreciation in fixing taste, in forming standards for the worth of later experiences. They arouse discontent with conditions which fall below their measure. They create a demand for surroundings